Danny. Well, several schools across our viewing area are kicking off some Thursday night lights instead of the usual Friday because they're moving up their varsity football games because of the potential weather tomorrow. Some of the area's varsity football matchups being played include Van Buren at Greenwood. Greenwood was actually the first school to announce the reschedule. Undefeated Bentonville will visit undefeated Rogers in a 7A West battle. Fayetteville will be at Springdale, and Morrilton will be at Cardinal Stadium in Farmington. Coaches say there's nothing worse than having games disrupted because of weather delays, and it's not so much the rain that they're worried about, but the lightning. If lightning were to strike within a few miles, there's an automatic 30-minute delay. Rogers coach Chad Harbison says he's happy with the decision to play a day later.
Last thing you want to do is get in a game and get rolling and then get a lightning delay or get in. We've all been in those where it might be. I've had games where we didn't finish till after midnight, or we had to come back the next day and try to finish a game. It just, it affects the crowd. It affects the atmosphere. It affects the momentum. It affects so many things.
Well, the state must set a new date for the special election to fill District 26's empty Senate seat after a judge ruled in favor of a resident in Franklin County. Colt Shelby sued Governor Sanders over the Senate District 26 special election date, originally set for June 2026. The court ruled that the date was too late, ordering the election as soon as practicable, no more than 150 days after Senator Gary Stubblefield's death. Shelby calls it a win for voters and says that it shows that Arkansans want their voices heard at the Capitol.
So for all of Arkansas, it's a great thing because it shows that, hey, there are people out there that care about the law, that uphold the law.
Well, the governor's office says it plans to appeal, arguing that she has the authority to set special elections. The ruling now puts pressure on the state to schedule a vote before February 23rd, 2026. Frustration continues to grow nationwide as the federal government shutdown reaches day 23. Many federal workers are missing paychecks while lawmakers remain gridlocked in Washington. Across the country, furloughed federal workers are turning to food banks and community support as they miss another check. In Washington, the Senate is considering a measure that would allow some federal employees, like active duty military, to be paid while the shutdown continues. So far, efforts to fully reopen the government have failed as both parties remain divided over spending legislation.
The Democrats keep voting to keep it shut down. They need to end this game.
Republicans need to come to the table and negotiate a bipartisan spending agreement that meets the needs of the American people.
At day 23, the shutdown is now the second longest in United States history. The first was during President Trump's previous term. The shutdown lasted more than a month. Secretary of State Marco Rubio arrived in Israel today as the Trump administration tries to ensure that a U.S. brokered peace deal between Israel and Hamas stays on track. The White House is also speaking out against a symbolic vote by Israel's parliament to annex the West Bank. Nellie Brand has more.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio is meeting today with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He says he will also be visiting the Military Coordination Center that's working on humanitarian aid and also monitoring this peace deal. Now, before heading back to the U.S., Vice President Vance says he thinks reconstruction in parts of Gaza that are free from Hamas can happen fairly quickly.
Vice President J.D. Vance left Israel today saying he feels optimistic about the ceasefire holding.
I think that we're on a very good pathway. It's very early, but it's a good start.
But he also criticized a symbolic vote by hardliners in the Israeli parliament to annex the West Bank, land Palestinians want for a future state.
If it was a political stunt, it was a very stupid political stunt, and I personally take some insult to it. The West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel. The policy of the Trump administration is that the West Bank will not be annexed by Israel.
Hours after Vance's departure, Secretary of State Marco Rubio arrived as the Trump administration works with allies on its peace plan, including the challenge of disarming Hamas and rebuilding Gaza.
With momentum in the Middle East, the administration was hoping for progress with Russia and Ukraine, but President Trump is no longer planning a second in-person meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin.
It didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like we were going to get to the place we have to get, so I canceled it.
Russian strikes this week targeted civilian sites, including a kindergarten in Ukraine's second largest city. The administration has now imposed new sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies, saying it's the result of Russia's lack of a serious commitment to a peace process.
I think that they'll certainly have an impact. They're massive sanctions.
A Russian spokeswoman called the new sanctions counterproductive.
President Trump was asked by reporters yesterday whether the administration will send those long-range Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. He said that the training to use them could take 6 months to a year, and that the only way it would be shot is if the U.S. shot it. He said, we're not going to do that. Natalie Brand, CBS News, the White House.
At a European summit today, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky thanked the United States for the new sanctions, but adds that even more pressure on Russia is needed for a ceasefire. There are 2 new United States strikes on boats the Pentagon says were carrying drugs, this time in the Pacific. Defense video released Wednesday shows 2 separate strikes, one vessel half loaded with black bundles, another erupting in flames and leaving parcels floating in the water. Officials say these are the first Pacific strikes in a campaign that now totals 9 known strikes in less than 2 months. One of the boats was taken from Colombia, a country United States officials blame for roughly 90% of the cocaine that reaches the United States. The Pentagon figures at least 37 people have died. The White House insists that the actions are part of an armed conflict with the cartels, but has released no public evidence about who was on the boats or what they carried.
Every one of those boats that gets knocked out is saving 25,000 American lives.
President Trump says he may go to Congress before taking any land operations. Now to a family's remarkable survival after their boat caught fire off of the coast of Massachusetts. The Coast Guard says it rescued them after they were stranded for 2 days. The family woke up to find their boat on fire and swam to a small island off of Cape Cod. Tom Hansen has more.
Mayday, mayday, mayday. Our ship went down at Tarpaulin Cove.
2 days after their ship was engulfed in flames, forcing them to swim for their lives, the Sullivan family was able to issue a mayday call to the U.S. Coast Guard Wednesday morning.
Our ship burned while we were sleeping, and we barely escaped. This vessel has sunk, and we are in the farmhouse on the hill.
The trio, Patrick Sullivan, his wife Cece, and their son Tyler, were alerted to the fire by their dogs barking Monday night. They couldn't save the animals as they escaped, but they eventually took shelter in a barn on Noshawn Island, where they were stranded until Wednesday. Their call for help only possible after finding the boat's radio had washed onto the beach.
The Coast Guard received a report of 03 people in Tarpaulin Cove, Noshawn Island, in need of assistance.
A Coast Guard helicopter picked them up and took them to Cape Cod Hospital. Family member Chris Sullivan told CBS Boston his father is being treated at a burn center. His mother is hospitalized in stable but critical condition, and his brother is recovering from third-degree burns and smoke inhalation. The community there was shaken by the news.
Disasters at sea are often pretty terrifying. So, but to hear one, especially like this right here, we don't really get that.
Tom Hansen, CBS News.